The call from the unknown. The Galactic Communications Hub buzzed with activity as it usually did. Officers, technicians, and analysts worked tirelessly, scanning through waves of signals from across the galaxy. Most of the time, it was routine, a simple exchange of trade data, sensor reports from far-flung outposts, or the occasional diplomatic message. But today was different. Today, something was about to happen that would change everything. Lieutenant Zara Blake sat at her station, staring at the monitor before her. She was tired, exhausted, even, but that didn't stop her from continuing her work. She was used to long hours, used to the quiet hum of the control room, the endless data streams, and the occasional flicker of activity that hinted at something important. Today, however, it was a single message that caught her attention. The screen flickered, the noise of the hub momentarily dulling as the signal came through. At first, it seemed like a simple glitch, just another small anomaly in the endless flow of data. But Zara knew better than to ignore the unusual. The system had identified the signal as a distress call, but there was something strange about it. The message was broken, almost unrecognizable, and it came from a sector no one had ever explored before. Sector Epsilon 13. Zora muttered under her breath. That's on the edge of the galaxy. No one has ventured that far in centuries. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard as she tried to piece together the fragmented message. The words were incomplete, garbled, but one thing was clear. It was a cry for help. Emergency. Hostile. System compromised. The words echoed in Zora's mind as she repeated them in disbelief. She stared at the screen, hoping that the message would resolve, but it didn't. It was as if something was deliberately preventing the transmission from being clear. Zara's mind raced. This wasn't just some random distress signal. No, there was more to this. She could feel it in the pit of her stomach. She'd been in the communications hub long enough to know when something was wrong, when the universe was sending a warning. And this, whatever it was a warning. Her heart skipped a beat as she quickly ran the data through the system, trying to locate the source of the signal. The coordinates were locked, but Zara couldn't shake the growing sense of unease that gnawed at her. Sector Epsilon 13 was located in one of the galaxy's least explored regions. The stars there were distant, faint, and the area had been marked on old maps as dangerous and unstable. Why now? Zara whispered to herself. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. No one ever went to Sector Epsilon 13. There were rumors about it, whispers that said strange things lurked there, hidden away from the rest of the galaxy. Some said it was an ancient battlefield. Others spoke of mysterious artifacts that had been lost to time. But whatever it was, it had been left alone for a reason. She reached for the comms, her fingers trembling slightly. Captain Ellis, you need to hear this. It took only a few moments for Captain Ellis to respond, his voice clear and authoritative as always. Blake, this better be important. Zara hesitated, trying to push down the rising anxiety in her chest. It's a distress signal, sir. It's coming from Sector Epsilon 13. There was a long pause before Captain Ellis replied, and Zara could almost feel the weight of his skepticism through the comms. Are you telling me we're going to investigate a distress signal from a dead zone? It's not just any signal, Captain, Zara said, her voice more urgent now. The message is broken, but the coordinates are clear. Something is happening out there, and we need to know what it is. She heard the sound of Captain Ellis moving in the background, likely pacing. She could almost picture him. Tall, sharp features, the kind of leader who always relied on logic to make his decisions. It was that very logic that made him pause before responding. Send the data to the fleet, Blake, Captain Ellis said after a beat. Prepare a response team. We'll get a fleet to investigate. But be clear, we're not going out there unprepared. Zara nodded, though she knew he couldn't see her. She immediately sent the coordinates and the message data to the fleet's command, and within moments, a response team was being assembled. There was no turning back now. Zara felt a mixture of dread and anticipation. The call had been made. The ship was on its way. Meanwhile, the rest of the communication hub had slowly picked up on the anomaly. Officers glanced nervously at their consoles as whispers began to spread through the room. Even the most seasoned of them couldn't help but feel the cold shiver that ran down their spines. Something was out there. Something no one had ever seen before. As the response team mobilized, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The signal had been sent for a reason, and the galaxy was about to face a terror unlike anything it had ever encountered. Zara's fingers hovered over the keys, still working on decoding the message, but it was clear. Whatever had sent the distress signal was not going to be easily explained. The response would come, but would they be ready for what they would find? Zara's mind raced with thoughts of the unknown, of what lay hidden in the black void of space, just beyond the reach of the known galaxy. As the fleet prepared to head into the dangerous unknown, Zara realized with a chilling certainty that this was not just another routine mission. This was something bigger, something older, and something far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. The Galactic Fleet, led by Captain Ellis, navigated the vast and silent stretch of space toward Sector Epsilon 13. The distance was immense, but the signal they had received kept the crew on edge, urging them forward into the unknown. It wasn't just the uncertainty of the mission that unsettled them, but the haunting feeling that something was waiting for them, a presence that no one could see, yet everyone could feel. The fleet consisted of several ships, but the flagship, the Resolve, commanded by Captain Ellis, was the largest and most advanced. The ship's hull gleamed under the distant starlight, its engines humming steadily as they pushed through the cold, empty void. Yet, despite its technological superiority, there was a certain sense of vulnerability that gripped the crew as they neared the coordinates. On board, Zara Blake sat at her station, her eyes fixed on the dark expanse of space outside. The further they traveled, the colder it felt. It was as though the stars themselves had turned their backs on them. The once brilliant constellations had begun to fade, and the space around them grew darker, almost oppressive. There were no signs of life, no passing ships, no signals, nothing but the cold, empty silence of the universe. "Captain," Zara said, her voice filled with unease. "The stars, they're disappearing." Captain Ellis, standing at the bridge with his arms crossed, glanced out toward the deep, dark space ahead. The coldness in his eyes seemed to match the chill that had settled over the crew. He wasn't one to show fear, but even he couldn't deny the strange feeling gnawing at his gut. "We'll be fine, Lieutenant," he said, though his voice lacked the usual confidence. "Keep your eyes on the sensors. We need to find the source of that signal." As the fleet approached the outer edges of the sector, the once faint signal became louder. It was still distorted, still fractured, but now it was unmistakably stronger. The pattern was clear. A series of... Before she could finish her sentence, the ship's sensors began to malfunction. Lights flickered across the bridge, and a deep, resonating hum filled the air. The crew looked around in confusion, unsure of what was happening. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the walls of the Resolve, as if the very ship was trembling. "Status report," Captain Ellis barked, his voice sharp with authority. "We're picking up interference," the sensor officer replied. "It's coming from that location. It's like something is messing with our systems. We're losing stability." Zara's heart raced. "We need to turn back," she said urgently. "Something's out there, and it's not just a signal. We're walking into a trap." But Captain Ellis remained unmoved. His face was stern, but his eyes betrayed his doubt. "We've come too far to turn back now. We need answers." Without another word, the fleet continued its course, moving toward the source of the signal. The tension on board was palpable. The crew was on edge, their nerves frayed, knowing they were heading into a sector that no one had dared to enter for centuries. Yet the pull of the unknown was too strong. Curiosity, mixed with the duty to uncover the truth, kept them moving forward. As they neared the coordinates, a massive shadow appeared on the sensors. It was large, unnaturally large, and it seemed to be cloaked, blending into the background of space. The readings were erratic, shifting from normal to extreme in mere seconds. "Captain," Zara said, her voice tight with fear. "It's a ship. An enormous one, but it's not like anything we've ever seen." The entire bridge went silent as the massive object came into full view. It was a vessel, but it was unlike any ship the crew had ever encountered. Its design was alien, ancient, and unmistakably menacing. The hull was dark, almost black, and covered in strange markings, symbols that seemed to shift and change the longer you looked at them. The crew stared at the screen in disbelief. It was as though the ship had been abandoned for millennia. Yet somehow it was still alive, still pulsing with a faint, sinister energy. The distress signal seemed to be coming from it, and the closer they got, the more Zara felt the weight of the ship's presence pressing down on her. "That ship, it's been here longer than we can imagine," Zara said quietly, her voice trembling. "It's not just abandoned. It's been waiting. For us." Captain Ellis clenched his fists. "Get us closer. We need to board and find out what's going on." The fleet closed in on the mysterious vessel. As they approached, the ship's enormous size became even more intimidating. It was almost as if the entire sector had been designed to hide it, to protect it from the prying eyes of the galaxy. "We're not alone," Zara whispered. Her instincts screamed at her to turn back, but she knew there was no turning back now. The ship's airlock doors opened, revealing an eerie darkness inside. It was as though the ship itself was calling them, luring them into its depths. And then, without warning, a deep rumble echoed through the resolve. The lights flickered and died. For the first time in a long while, Captain Ellis felt fear. True, raw fear. They had crossed into the unknown, and the galaxy was about to learn just how terrifying the void could be. As the resolve drifted closer to the mysterious alien vessel, the eerie silence was almost suffocating. The air on the bridge grew tense, with every crew member feeling the weight of what they were about to face. Zara Blake sat at her console, her hands shaking as she attempted to keep the communication systems operational. The ship's sudden malfunction had caused widespread panic, and despite their best efforts, it seemed that the vessel's influence was only growing stronger. "Status report," Captain Ellis demanded, his voice tight with anxiety. "Power systems are unstable," replied the officer in charge of engineering. "We're trying to stabilize the shields, but the energy fluctuations are too strong. It's like something is draining us." The captain's jaw clenched. "We can't afford to lose power now. Keep pushing forward." Zora glanced over at the dark, imposing shape of the alien ship, which loomed larger with every passing moment. Its hull was covered in cryptic symbols that shifted and seemed to come to life as they drew closer. The ship felt ancient, like a relic from a time long forgotten, but it was also disturbingly active. The pulsations coming from the vessel were rhythmic, almost as if it were breathing. Zara tried to keep her composure, but the growing sense of dread gnawed at her. There was something fundamentally wrong about this place, about this ship. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, to get away. But Captain Ellis's orders kept them on course. "Sir, we're getting something," Zara said, her voice almost a whisper. She turned her attention back to her console. The distress signal had become more coherent now, though still fragmented. There were bursts of static, but the message seemed clearer, almost as if it were being broadcast directly into their minds. Zara shivered as the words began to come through. "Help. Trapped. So long. Trapped. Cannot escape. Darkness. Beyond. Fear." It was as though the message was being dragged from the very soul of the ship, a cry of desperation that sent a chill down Zora's spine. There was no indication of who had sent it, or even when it had been sent. It felt ancient, like it had been waiting for someone to hear it. "Captain, it's almost like the ship is alive," Zora said, her voice trembling. "The signal, it's not just a distress call anymore. It feels like a warning. It's begging for help, but at the same time, It's warning us to stay away. Captain Ellis frowned and gripped the edge of his command chair. No turning back now, Lieutenant. We need answers. The tension on the bridge was unbearable as the fleet continued its slow approach to the airlock door to the alien vessel hissed open, revealing an unearthly darkness that seemed to stretch on forever. No lights illuminated the halls, and the cold, oppressive silence was deafening. The atmosphere felt thick, as though the very air itself had been waiting for something, or someone, to break it. Zara Blake stepped cautiously into the shadowy corridor, her boots making soft echoes as they hit the cold metal floor. Behind her, Captain Ellis and his team followed, their faces grim and determined. The rest of the boarding party was on high alert, weapons drawn and scanning the environment. The crew moved with precision, their hearts racing with the same fear that had settled in Zora's chest. No one spoke. The stillness of the ship was so complete that it felt unnatural, almost suffocating. Zora's eyes darted from one end of the corridor to the other. The walls were covered in the same shifting, alien symbols they had seen on the exterior of the vessel. The patterns seemed to pulse faintly, as if they were alive, reacting to the presence of the humans. But the symbols didn't seem to hold any meaning Zora could understand. They were too complex, too ancient, and too foreign for any of their technology to decipher. The deeper they moved into the ship, the colder it became. Zara could feel the chill creeping into her bones, seeping through her suit. The others seemed to feel it too, their breaths visible in the air, as though they were standing in the heart of deep space. What the hell is this place? Lieutenant Dawson, one of the soldiers on the boarding team, muttered under his breath. His voice barely broke the silence, but it was enough to send a shiver down Zora's spine. I don't know, Zora replied quietly, her voice tense with uncertainty. But we need to find out. As they moved deeper into the vessel, the faint hum they had heard from outside grew louder. It resonated through the walls, vibrating in the very marrow of their bones. It was a strange sound, not mechanical, but almost organic. A low, constant rumble that seemed to pulse with life. It was as though the ship itself was alive, breathing in the dark silence. Then, without warning, a door at the end of the corridor slid open with a loud screech, the sound of metal dragging against metal. The crew froze, weapons raised, eyes wide with caution. Something, or someone, had activated the door. Stay sharp, Captain Ellis ordered, his voice low and commanding. Zara's heart raced as the group slowly advanced toward the door. The heavy air seemed to thicken, pressing down on them, making each step feel heavier than the last. As they approached the door, a strange glow began to emit from the room beyond, casting flickering shadows across the walls. Captain, something's not right, Zara whispered, her voice filled with tension. Her instincts were screaming at her to turn back, but she knew there was no escaping now. They had to go forward. They entered the room, and the sight that greeted them was beyond anything Zara had prepared herself for. The chamber was massive, stretching out far beyond what the ship's exterior had suggested. In the center of the room was an enormous crystalline structure that pulsed with an eerie, sickly light. The walls around the room were lined with strange, dark artifacts, strange devices that hummed with an energy that made Zora's skin crawl. At the center of it all was a figure, a being unlike anything the humans had ever seen. It stood perfectly still, encased in what appeared to be a transparent, glowing cocoon, its body suspended in the air by some unknown force. The creature was humanoid, but its features were distorted, its limbs elongated and its skin an unsettling shade of grayish-black. Its eyes, if it had eyes, were empty, just hollow black voids. The crew stood frozen, staring at the figure. The room was heavy with an oppressive energy, as though the being within the cocoon was not merely a prisoner, but something far worse, a thing that had been kept locked away for a reason. "What is this?" Lieutenant Dawson whispered, his voice trembling. Captain Ellis stepped forward, his eyes narrowed in disbelief. "I don't know, but it looks like It looks like it's been here for a very long time. Zara's pulse quickened as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. The creature, whatever it was clearly no ordinary life form, and the way it was suspended within the cocoon, like it had been frozen in time, made her wonder just how long it had been here. A sudden, high-pitched shriek echoed through the chamber, a sound so jarring and intense that it made the crew wince in pain. The glow around the cocoon flickered violently, and Zara stumbled back in shock as the creature's limbs twitched, then spasmed. Its body began to shift within the cocoon, as though it was awakening from a long slumber. "Get back," Captain Ellis shouted, raising his weapon as the crew scattered. But it was too late. The cocoon cracked open with a loud, sharp snap, and the being inside let out a guttural roar. It moved with terrifying speed, its limbs stretching unnaturally as it lurched toward the humans. Zara's heart raced. The creature was awake. It was no longer a prisoner. And now it was free. A wave of fear washed over her as the creature's hollow eyes locked onto her. There was no remorse in its gaze, only a primal hunger, as if it had been starved for centuries. The darkness that had once surrounded the ship was now alive and moving. Captain Ellis opened fire, but the shots seemed to have no effect on the creature. It was too fast, too powerful, its skin as tough as steel. The team fired again, but it was clear that nothing was going to stop it. It was beyond anything they had ever faced before. Zara felt a cold sweat form on her brow as the creature lunged toward them, its mouth opening wide, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. She barely managed to dive out of the way, her heart pounding in her chest. The thing was a nightmare that had been waiting for them. And now that it was awake, there was no escaping it. The creature's roar echoed through the chamber, shaking the very walls of the alien ship. Zara's mind raced as she scrambled to her feet, heart pounding. Her hands fumbled for her weapon, but in the chaos of the moment, she barely registered the sound of blaster shots firing in every direction. The alien had become a blur of movement, its terrifying speed impossible to track. Every time a soldier fired, the creature dodged with unnatural agility, its movements erratic and wild, like something far too dangerous to predict. "Fall back," Captain Ellis shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. But the command was barely heard over the overwhelming sound of the creature's rage. It was too late to fall back now, too late to think of retreat. The fight was on, and the galaxy was about to learn how terrifying this thing could be. Zara sprinted to the far side of the room, her breath coming in short, frantic gasps. She turned and fired another round, but the blast hit the creature's side and barely seemed to faze it. Its skin shimmered like liquid metal, deflecting the shot with a dull, metallic ring. It wasn't just resilient, it was otherworldly. They had underestimated this thing in every possible way. She heard the frantic screams of Lieutenant Dawson as the creature lunged for him, its claws slashing the air with terrifying precision. Zara's stomach churned as she saw Dawson try to defend himself, only to be sent flying across the room with one swipe of the creature's elongated arm. His body hit the wall with a sickening thud, and he crumpled to the floor, unconscious or worse. "Dawson!" Zara yelled, her voice sharp with panic. She raised her weapon again, but before she could fire, the creature turned its head and locked its empty, void-like eyes on her. A chill ran down her spine, and for a brief moment, she swore she could feel its gaze cutting through her, seeing right into her soul. Before she could react, the creature was on her, moving like a shadow in the night. She had no time to think, only to move. She dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the sharp claws that reached for her throat. The air around her hummed with the energy of the creature's movement, too fast for the human eye to track. Zara's heart raced in her chest as she rolled to her feet, desperate to keep her distance, but there was nowhere to run. The rest of the team was now fully engaged in the fight. Captain Ellis barked orders, trying to coordinate the defense, but Zara could see the truth in his eyes. There was no plan that could work. This thing was unstoppable. No weapon they had seemed capable of hurting it. The alien was too strong, too fast, and too relentless. Another soldier, Sergeant Martinez, fired a full clip into the creature's chest, and for a brief moment, the monster staggered back. But then it let out an unearthly screech, louder than any sound they'd heard before, and its body began to glow with an eerie blue light. The energy surged through its form like a wave of power, and when it reached its peak, the creature's body seemed to warp and twist as if it were made of pure energy. Zara's eyes widened in horror as the thing's form began to change. Its limbs elongated further, its body contorting into a more monstrous shape. It was no longer just an alien. It was something else entirely, something beyond their understanding. The monster's aura pulsed with power, and for the first time, Zara realized the true horror of what they were facing. This creature wasn't just some alien life form. It was a weapon, a living, breathing force of destruction. "Get to the escape pods," Captain Ellis shouted, his voice urgent as the team struggled to regroup. But Zara could see the grim truth in his eyes. There was no escape, not unless they killed the creature, and killing it seemed impossible. The alien creature snapped its head toward them again, its glowing eyes now crackling with energy. It opened its mouth wide, and Zara saw its fangs, jagged and sharp, like the teeth of some ancient predator. But it wasn't just the fangs that were terrifying. It was the pulse of raw energy that gathered in its mouth. It was charging a weapon of some kind, and Zara could feel the air around her grow heavy with the intensity of its power. "We're not getting out of here unless we stop it," Ellis shouted, signaling to the remaining crew. "Focus on the weak points. The energy source, it has to be somewhere in the body." Zara didn't need to be told twice. As the creature took a step forward, preparing to unleash its devastating attack, Zara lunged into action. Her eyes scanned the room, looking for anything that might give them an edge. It was then that she saw it, a shimmering light near the creature's chest. "There!" Zara shouted. "The energy core. It's there." With all her strength, she charged toward the creature, dodging blasts of energy that shot from its mouth. She was running out of time, but she couldn't stop now. The creature had already destroyed too much, and if they didn't act quickly, they would be wiped out in seconds. She reached the edge of the creature's glowing form, her heart thumping in her chest, and aimed her weapon directly at the energy source. She fired. The blast hit the creature square in the chest, and for a moment, the whole ship seemed to freeze. The creature's body buckled as the energy core sparked, and an explosion of light and power erupted from within it. Zara's eyes went wide as the shockwave threw her back, slamming her into the wall with brutal force. The sound of the explosion was deafening, and for a moment, she was disoriented, struggling to stay conscious. Then, the room fell silent. Zara blinked, her vision blurry. The creature was gone, consumed by the blast. The energy around the room seemed to dissipate, leaving only the sound of her labored breathing. She had no idea if they were truly safe, or if it was only temporary. But for now, they had won the first battle. "Is anyone else alive?" Captain Ellis's voice rang out through the silence. Zara looked around the room, her eyes scanning the wreckage. The remaining crew was either unconscious or barely clinging to life. Only a few had survived. Zara wiped the blood from her face, her body aching with every movement. They had just faced something unlike anything they had ever imagined, and they were lucky to have made it out alive. But she knew this was only the beginning. The galaxy had just learned true terror, and it wasn't over. The ship was silent, eerily so. The stillness seemed to echo in Zara's mind as she staggered to her feet, clutching the wall for support. Her body ached, bruised from the impact of the explosion, but her mind was clear. The battle wasn't over. It couldn't be. The creature they had just faced had been an anomaly, a force of pure destruction. But Zara had learned one important thing during the fight. The galaxy was full of horrors they hadn't even begun to understand. "We need to move," Captain Ellis said, his voice steady, but laced with the tension of a man who knew they weren't safe yet. He looked around the room, assessing the damage. Most of the crew was injured, some barely breathing, but they were alive. That was something. They could regroup, rebuild. But the question weighed heavily in the air. What had they just fought? Zara couldn't shake the image of the creature's glowing, shifting body, the way it seemed to bend the very laws of physics. She had never seen anything like it. No known species, no technology, nothing from their records could explain its power. And the energy that had surged from it, that was something entirely new. Lieutenant Zara. Ellis's voice broke through her thoughts. She turned to him, meeting his weary gaze. We need answers. You've got the most combat experience. Find out what's left of the ship's systems. We need to know what we're dealing with before we're attacked again. Zara nodded, wiping the blood from her lips. She could feel the weight of her responsibility, but she knew they didn't have much time. If whatever had attacked them was part of something bigger, they needed to find out as soon as possible. The crew moved quickly, checking their surroundings, securing the fallen soldiers, and making sure no more threats were hiding in the shadows. Zara moved toward the bridge, her footsteps heavy as the uncertainty of their situation pressed down on her. The ship was massive, with corridors stretching far beyond her vision. She didn't know what she'd find, but she knew that it wouldn't be easy. When she reached the control room, she immediately began to scan the systems, looking for any traces of the creature, any signal that might explain what had happened. The screens flickered to life, showing maps of the ship, systems still trying to function despite the damage. Zara's fingers danced over the console, trying to access the logs. She gasped when the screen displayed something she hadn't expected, an unfamiliar code embedded deep within the ship's communication system. It wasn't part of any standard protocol. It was a signal, almost like a warning. But who could have sent it? The code was too complex to be of human origin. There was no doubt about it. Whoever had triggered the distress signal, it wasn't just a simple cry for help. It was bait. The creature, the attack, it had all been set up. And someone, or something, was behind it. Zara's thoughts raced. Could there be a larger force at play here? An invasion? A conspiracy? She felt the cold fingers of dread tightening around her heart. They had just fought a weapon beyond their understanding, and now they were facing an enemy that was playing a long, dangerous game. Captain Ellis stepped into the control room, his expression grim. What have you found? Zara pointed at the screen. This isn't just a distress signal. It's a trap. Someone, or something, used the creature to lure us here. Ellis frowned, taking a closer look at the code. Are you saying someone knew we'd come? Yes, Zara said, her voice low. And that's what scares me the most. This wasn't random. This was planned. Who would do something like this? Ellis muttered, his brow furrowed. Zara couldn't answer him. She didn't know. But there was one thing she was certain of now. This was only the beginning. The galaxy was a far darker place than they had ever imagined. As the minutes passed, the weight of their situation sank deeper into Zara's chest. The distress signal, the creature, the trap, it all pointed to something far larger than any of them could have prepared for. Someone had been watching them, and they were far more dangerous than any alien monster they had ever faced. Get the survivors to the escape pods, Ellis said, breaking the silence. We need to regroup and figure out our next move. We can't stay here. If there's a larger force behind this, we need to be ready. Zara hesitated for a moment, her mind still racing. The thought of running, of leaving the ship, felt wrong. They couldn't just abandon the fight. Not after everything they had been through. But Ellis was right. They needed to survive. They needed to make it back home. They needed to warn everyone. If the galaxy didn't understand the danger they were facing, it would be too late to stop the destruction. Understood, Zara said, nodding firmly. She turned away from the console, her eyes narrowing with resolve. Let's get moving. As they prepared to leave the control room, Zara took one last look at the flickering screens. She knew the battle wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. The creatures they had fought were only the first wave. The real enemy was out there, waiting, watching, and they would stop at nothing to make sure the galaxy fell. The true horror had only just begun. The escape pods launched into the cold expanse of space, carrying the surviving crew members to safety. Zara watched as the ship, now little more than a burning husk in the distance, was consumed by the void. There was no time to mourn, no time for regrets. The galaxy was changing, and they had to be ready. Captain Ellis stood beside her, his gaze fixed on the ship's wreckage. His voice was low but filled with a chilling determination. "We've seen what they're capable of. We can't let this go unpunished." Zara nodded, her fists clenched at her sides. She understood his words all too well. The creature, the distress signal, the trap, it was all part of something much larger, and they had just barely survived it. The unknown enemy was still out there, and it wasn't just a single alien species or a rogue faction. Zara had realized something terrifying in the last few hours. This was the beginning of an all-out war, one that could tear the galaxy apart. Whoever had been pulling the strings, whoever had orchestrated the attack, was far more powerful than anything they had ever faced before. The escape pods broke through the atmosphere of the nearest planet, touching down on its rugged surface. Zara barely had time to collect her thoughts before she was greeted by military officials and other survivors who had been waiting for their return. The atmosphere was heavy with the grim silence of what had happened. Everyone knew that the battle was far from over. "We've received reports," one of the officials said, his voice strained. "There's been a massive uptick in military activity, not just from the creatures you fought, but from dozens of different factions across the galaxy. Something's coming. We need to prepare." Zara felt a knot tighten in her stomach. It was happening faster than she had expected. Whatever had caused the attack on their ship wasn't a random incident. It was a signal, a call to arms. "Who's behind this?" Ellis asked, his voice hard, demanding an answer. "We don't know yet," the official replied, "but we've intercepted communication from several races. They're all moving toward the same coordinates. It seems like the creatures you faced are only the first wave of an invasion." Zara exchanged a look with Ellis. The real fight was just beginning. They were no longer just survivors. They were the first line of defense against something far worse. They had to stop whatever was coming, or the galaxy would fall into chaos. "We need to unite," Zara said, her voice steady, though her heart was pounding in her chest. "If we don't stand together, we won't survive." Captain Ellis nodded, his eyes focused on the horizon. "We're already gathering forces. We'll make alliances with whoever is still willing to fight. It's the only chance we have." Zara's mind raced as she thought of the people she had met across the galaxy, races who had never thought humanity was a threat, who had looked down on them as weak or primitive. Now those same races would need to stand with humanity if they wanted to survive. "Prepare the fleet," she said, her voice filled with purpose. "We'll need everything we've got." As the days passed, word of the invasion spread. Reports flooded in from all corners of the galaxy. Military forces that had once been fragmented began to unify, forming an alliance against the unknown enemy. But there was still one question on everyone's mind. Who was behind the attack? Then, the answers started coming. The first clue arrived in the form of intercepted communications. They were from an ancient race, one that had long been forgotten by most of the galaxy. Their name was the Vorith, a species so old that their existence had become nothing more than a myth. Legends said they had once ruled the galaxy, but they had disappeared long before humanity had even begun to explore the stars. But now, they were back, and they were leading an invasion unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Vorith were not just a species. They were a collective consciousness, a race of beings that had evolved far beyond the physical form. They communicated through thought, and their technology was far superior to anything humanity had ever encountered. Zara felt a cold shiver run down her spine as she learned more about the Vorith. Their plan was simple: wipe out all opposition and establish their dominion over the galaxy once again. They had manipulated the creatures they had faced, using them as pawns to weaken their enemies before the real war began. As humanity's fleet gathered strength, Zara found herself at the forefront of the battle. The memories of the previous fight, the explosion, the blood, the terror, were still fresh in her mind. But now there was a new fire burning within her. The Vorath had made a grave mistake by attacking humanity. They had underestimated the spirit of those who had fought their way through the stars. The battle for the galaxy was about to begin, and Zara, along with the rest of humanity, would stand at the forefront of it, ready to prove that even the greatest of empires could fall when they faced the fury of the human race. "We'll show them what it means to challenge us," Zara said, her voice filled with fierce determination. The galaxy would learn, in time, that humanity was not to be underestimated. It was a war for survival, and humanity's answer was clear: fight until the end.